I'm Marc Daniel Nelson here today with Make My Music. Today I'm going to go over my template, my digital template and my analog template, utilizing all of my outboard gear here. So the couple emails I've gotten in the last few days were asking about showing more in-depth detail about what my digital template looks like. So I'm going to do that in a second. And I'm going to also go over my out-of-the-box chain. And for that, I'm going to talk about the summing, the compression, the EQ, and the conversion, because even with the conversion, it's going to make a big difference on the sound. When I first started working in the commercial music world, outside of the album world, I was asked to go over, 3 or 4 projects a day in recalls. And with film world and advertisement world, there seemed to always be no shortage of recalls. So I needed to find a way to be able to get in and out of songs very quickly, starting mixes very quickly, and having them go right off the bat. Now, there's a lot of people out there that talk about their template and what it means to them and why they designed it around their custom taste. For me, it was really simple. Make it easy. Make it navigational for anyone who has ever opened the session up to understand what it means. So that goes all the way down to labeling auxes, labeling sends. Everything is labeled, and the color coding is identical, usually per song. So we'll go over that too. The biggest thing I like to show you is my analog chain that goes after it. For all the projects I do outside of the box, this is an enormous difference in sound between in the box and out of the box. And I found that even with plugins, I can't seem to get the one special sauce that I can get using my analog chain. So let's talk more about that. This song is a song by the artist Lena Andersson and was produced by Nicholas Johansson. This was also a really special project, and it was tracked in LA here by Jeff Emmerich and co-produced by him, and I believe it was his last project before he passed away. Matt Chamberlain on drums plays on it, which is really neat. I might actually come back to this song later on another date and do a breakdown of this mix because this song is super, super cool. But right now I'm going to use this as an example of my template and my analog chain. Let me break it down. I've talked about this a handful of times, and I just wanted to put it all in a compressed video talking about my chain and what I do for my template. In my template, I usually go and start with drums grouped, percussion grouped, FX grouped. Those go into their own stereo buses. So drums on their own, percussion on their own, effects on their own. And then I go and I do bass guitar on its own, acoustic guitars on its own, guitars on its own, keyboards, usually B3s, Rhodes, and pianos on their own, synthesizers, including the bass and the low-end frequency stuff, and then background vocals and lead vocals. If there's orchestra, there's strings, which is orchestra, brass, and woodwinds. Those dump down to a stereo, and those are always in yellow. You can see drums, percussion, effects, bass, acoustic guitar, keys, all the way down the line to lead vocals. These are alted and multed to a separate analog chain, but today I'm going to show you just what I have here, that it's going to be on its own. So for right now, I'll just demonstrate what I have in the box because I already have the analog printed due to routing for this video. Once it goes down to that, I actually have reverbs on their own too. And these are exactly what they are. This is, I've been demonstrating on another video, the different styles that I have in my head. These are presets that I have always in my template, kind of set up, ready to go. For my drums, I usually use 2 or 3 different types of compression depending on the song. This song seemed to need a little more spanky snappiness, so I used the UAD. It seems to be the best distressor that I've found, be the closest without it having any kind of other special plugin elements that some developers like to put in their plugins. The other option I use is the Fab filter. This is a little cleaner, more kind of tamed compressor that I would use on less aggressive drums. Then I go down the line and I can go into the Acoustica Ultramarine, which is the Fairchild version. This is really good for getting kind of vibe out of anything if you really want to get super colored. I don't like putting too much distortion or any kind of harmonic content in the drums, but if I did, I would go and put the decapitator or a tape simulator. Now, these two are kind of similar, which they're bringing out specific elements that I need without it being too colored. But for today, I didn't use that. I also have a Pultec, which is always doing relatively the similar thing, 60 and 10K, and that will just get me closer to the drum sound that I want right off the bat. The bass actually has two separate amp emulations I need to use depending on the song. Sometimes I don't use it at all. Too much harmonic thunder, as I would call it, and I just don't use it. I use the B15 today, but I've used the SVT as well. This seems to really thicken it up, but you have to be careful. I usually cut some low end, which is my next plugin, the Air EQ. Now, I like this EQ a little differently than the Fab filter because it just sounds different. I like the low pass filter and the high pass filter are very different than other EQs, and I like to put a little bump at 1K. And then the compressor of my choice, which it seems to always stay on the TubeTech. I've tried other compressors. They aren't bad. It's just this, for some reason, I don't even touch the compression. It always works on electric bass guitar. And then I have a little point again at 1K on the Pultec style. Going down, the guitars get a tiny bit of TubeTech and just a general cutoff on electrics. My acoustics, I do like to use the Abbey Road Zener as it adds a little bit of a flick. And sometimes that's too much, and I'll just go back to the MJUC. And the keys, the Fairchild, and then an EQ. And today I have just a little bit of thunder coming out of the organ, because the organ, the way Jeff Emmerich recorded the organ, there was 3 or 4 mics, and they wanted to retain a lot of the low end, so I had to cut some of that out. Going down, the synths, it's usually pretty simple. I don't really like to put too much compression on the synths because it seems to take a lot of the vibe out of that track. So I kind of leave that off and just EQ to taste. Woodwinds, brass, and orchestra are very same. I have these already engaged, but I don't really ever use them when they're ready. I have them in the session, but I don't really put them up other than the EQs. Once again, I do like to use the Air EQ for the brass and orchestra because it just has a specific sound that doesn't sound like anything else out there. Down to the lead vocals and backup vocals. Now, my lead vocal chain, which I just did an episode about strictly on just lead vocals, changes specifically per song, but it stays relative in the concept. In the backgrounds, you'll see that I have 2 de-essers going, and one is usually pulverizing the S's, so as you know, you don't need those as much as you need the master lead vocal S's. So I kind of just crush those just to kind of get them tucked. So when it doesn't sound flammy against the lead vocal. For today, I used maybe 1 parallel track, and I think it's on a send on an automation, maybe on the bridge it comes in. And that would be these fellas again, which I've done in another video. And these stay the same on all my parallels because drums, bass, guitar, piano, they all relatively have this setting with all of these separate plugins because it seems to add a lot of energy. And when you tuck it under, it adds a ton of energy and a ton of excitement. Which brings me to the master chain. Now, the first insert I have here is the converter. So when it goes out of each stereo bus into the solid state logic summing, it needs to come back. And instead of using the Orion converter for print, I want to use something that's a little more high quality and has a little bit of character on its own. And I've spent a long time just demoing and experimenting with different conversion up until I met Josh Florian when he was working for Bill Schnee and Doug Sachs building their converters. And it was just, after that, it was just very obvious where to go because it was very different than anything out there. That being said, there's some really good options out there. I had the Burl, I had a Benchmark, and I'll probably do another video of converter comparisons too. For my setup, the JCF just seems to make things bigger and more real imaging-wise and adds just a hint of special sauce that really takes it up that 5%. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the analog chain and why combined it should give you 20%. And 20%, as you guys know, is huge to attain. If you can't get above 90, if you hit your threshold at 90, it's hard to get that extra 10%. So if you got 110 after it, you're in a slam dunk era. For me, I spent years trying to find the perfect chain, and up until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was going in between different compressors and different summing boxes, and I just was not satisfied because I was switching genres so much that it was not flowing genre dependent. So here I have the solid state logic Sigma. I go into directly hard patched because I don't like to use patch bass. I don't have to. I don't have that much gear anymore that I have to as much as I used to. But there's the big reason is I just don't like the extra connection. Sound quality wise, it's best for me to just go hard patch as much as I can. So I'm hard patching from the Sigma into, for today, it's the Teagler Audio Switchcraft. And then it's hard patched into the API 5500 mastering EQ. And then it's hard patched directly into the JCF AD8, which I'm using 2 channels on. Now this converter has PEP, which is its own little cool thing, but I usually don't use that unless it's orchestra related because it does something that I'm not really a fan of on the transients, and that's just my taste. On the compression, I can go in between this Teagler or the Tube Tech I have down here, or even the Shadow Hills, which I do use from time to time still, and I'll literally just hard patch into those instead per song, and we're off to the races. So I think the kicker here is once I get it back in to Pro Tools, I go down the line where I have a multi-band kind of ready to go. If there's some area that's in the total of the stereo mix is just bugging me, I'll pop that in. But I relatively just leave it off. Same as just kind of overall surgical EQs. I try to handle that inside the session. I drop down to the ATR. This guy really does help me get what I need. And I've talked about using the repo head, the high frequency, to get error out of things. And it's a lot easier to open something up like that versus kind of going back and opening up somewhere else. It sounds very different than the API 55 top band. It's just combined when you do subtle movements, it really does kind of work. That falls down to the API 560 by UAD, which Eric Boulanger showed me years ago that it's emulating the 2520 op amp, which is funny because it's emulating what's in this hardware, but it still does something completely different. So when I take it off, it's different. It's like I miss it. So even when I'm mixing in the box or out of the box, I'll use it if I'm even using the real hardware, because it does add even one more step of like this neat little glue. And for monitoring, I use this Benchmark deck, and I started using this right after seeing it at the Mastering Lab years ago. It's just a phenomenal deck that's been around for many years, and it's pretty special. And I like to use this for directing right into my monitors and using the monitor leveler without having to use a monitor controller. Once again, skipping a patch if I have to. And then I can use my Audacy LCD X's for monitoring off of the headphone amp too, because it's got a really good headphone send on it. And going between those two, I usually can really nail the low end and the imaging between my ATCs, which are ATC 45s, and the headphones. And then once I get the mix, I always print it to a separate track, which usually has the ref on it, but today I actually have the analog version printed. So for today, I'm going to play the analog version, and then I can pop in the input, and it will be back to the in-the-box version. So let's take a listen to that. This song is called Amy.
Amy's looking out through the window.
So just take a listen to this. This is the analog print. I'm going to kick in the in-the-box version so you can hear what the chain is actually doing.
She's noticing a change in the weather.
Here is the in-the-box version.
Could this
then back to the analog version.
She's looking for the one with the broken wing.
Listen to the width that it's adding.
Sky is wide, but the streets are so narrow. And in her
The drums are actually sitting back. The vocal has a little bit of forwardness, and the summing seems to spread everything up a little bit.
she's waiting for whenever a weather.
Let's go between the two again. So here's the analog version,
Never and now.
and then in the box.
She's standing on the edge of something better. Oh yeah. But still she feels the wind on her shoulder.
Analog.
The sun is out.
Hear how it brings everything out. Thanks for watching.